So, you want to play Of Blood and Faith. Hello and welcome back to Podfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This is the fourth and final video in my series on the new Claws of the Tyrant adventure anthology. I suggest watching this series in order, as this video will be specific to preparing players for the Of Blood and Faith adventure, the third and final adventure in the anthology. If you're watching this video without having seen the previous three, you might be missing some context. This video will function like all my normal players' guides, providing a spoiler-free look at the setup and themes of the adventure, then giving some advice on builds and character ideas which might be particularly effective or thematic. Getting right into it, Of Blood and Faith is a 3-chapter adventure for 18th level characters, which will take the heroes all the way to 20th level by the time they face the final boss. The PCs in this adventure take on the roles of high-level warriors and mages, who are either members or allies of the Knights of Lastwall, an organization of knights dedicated to opposing and eventually defeating the Whispering Tyrant, Tar-Baphon. Starting at level 18, the PCs are heroic agents among the knights and their allies. As such, the initial mission which brings them together is fairly broad. Leaders among the Knights of Lastwall have noticed strange undead activity in the Gravelands, activity which is clearly coordinated, but which also is difficult to explain. The PCs are tasked with investigating the activity and following up on whatever leads they find. The heroes are given few restrictions or specifications beyond a location to check out, and are otherwise trusted to act on their own. At a thematic level, the idea of fate and faith and how they interact are recurring motifs in this story. The stories of the gods have historically been interwoven with the stories of men, and those stories are still being written to this day. At the same time, the idea of redemption for past misdeeds is prevalent as well. Many of the characters involved have undertaken unthinkable evils in their past, and while some characters accept this as part of themselves, others seek to make up for their mistakes. Finally, this adventure follows in the steps of the in-world historical Shining Crusade. The forces of undeath are monstrous abominations, and must be destroyed. With the exception of one key NPC, all undead beings in the story are villainous and beyond redemption. Violence is the answer to nearly all conflict in this AP, and the PCs are not expected to have any qualms about it. Despite this emphasis on combat as the primary method of conflict resolution, several skills will prove useful and worth focus in this adventure. The most important skill, by a wide margin, is religion. The religion skill will help with multiple plot-relevant investigations and interactions throughout the story, as well as with the identification of undead enemies, which are prevalent throughout. I would go so far as to say that nearly all characters should be trained or better in religion in this adventure. Of the other knowledge skills, Arcana is the next most useful, and will have several opportunities to shine, both in and out of combat. The thievery skill will be useful on multiple occasions due to a surprising number of traps and hazards. Of the social skills, diplomacy is definitely the most useful, and a party will benefit from having at least one specialist in this skill. A number of lore skills stand out here, with Erasni lore being the most important by far. Undead lore is useful as well, though specific subsets of undead lore might have key moments of importance too. Iomedae lore and Crimson Reclaimer lore will also be somewhat important, though they aren't necessary for success. As is true in all combat-focused adventures, the medicine skill will be useful at keeping the party alive and well. And, given the high level and 3-chapter length of this adventure, all the other major skills will have moments to be useful, so having broad skill coverage by the whole party will be helpful. With that high-level understanding in place, let's get a bit more specific. Where exactly do we start in Of Blood and Faith? The adventure begins when the PCs are summoned to a strategy meeting in the city of Velumis, which should be familiar to the players if they played through Gravelands Survivors previously. The meeting has been called by two prominent leaders among the Knights of Lastwall, Biravel Starshine and Iluna Varvatos. Biravel is a prominent bard and recruiter who is constantly on the lookout for new allies. Iluna, meanwhile, is the current leader among the defenders of Velumis, having previously survived the destruction of Vigil by Tar-Baphon's radiant fire. Once the PCs arrive, Biravel and Iluna make their report. Undead activity has been observed in the Gravelands, which speak to a degree of coordination among Tar-Baphon's forces. So far, these movements don't appear to have succeeded in whatever goal their commanders have had in store, but that goal is still unknown. What is clear is that the next target for these undead activities appears to be Korlach Keep, a small fort located about 40 miles from Velumis on the Pine Flow River. The PCs are then given their mission: travel to Korlach Keep and explore it before the undead forces can arrive. If the heroes find anything of interest, they should collect it and bring it back to Velumis, so the Knights of Lastwall might gain some insight into the activities of Tar-Baphon, or whichever of his lieutenants is coordinating these suspicious movements. Now, before I continue, I want to provide a brief review of the recent history of the Knights of Lastwall, as well as a look at their organizational structure, the factions present among them, and the allies with whom they work. Hopefully, this will allow new players in this adventure to build characters who feel at home among the knights. The Knights of Lastwall are an evolution of the Knights of Ozem, a powerful order of knights whose roots trace all the way back to Iomide and the Shining Crusade. The Knights of Ozem founded the nation of Lastwall with the express purpose of keeping an eye on Tar-Baphon after he was imprisoned within Gallowspire. This ended in 4719 AR, with the escape of the Tyrant and the destruction of the capital city of Vigil at his hands. The Knights of Ozem were functionally destroyed as an organization. Watcher Lord Ulthun II, the commander of the order, retreated to Absalom to further oppose the Tyrant's efforts, but most people in the Inner Sea assumed the Knights were gone for good. This may have been the case, were it not for the subtle involvement of the gods and the not-so-subtle efforts of mortals. During a week now referred to as the Reforging, the surviving knights began to gather at the new capital city of Velumis. The quartermasters in the city relit their forges and began repairing armor and handing out new weapons. Leaders among the surviving knights, including Iluna Varvatos, gave speeches and wrote songs to bolster the knights' resolve, acts which have now gone down in legend. During the Reforging, the two primary factions within the knights were formed. Clarith Iomidar, at that time Esquire, made her way to Velumis and confronted her mother, Calibrin. Calibrin advocated for a more conventional approach to resisting the Tyrant, building a coalition and containing the undead armies in the Gravelands until a large army could be formed to march to the Isle of Dread and oust Tar-Baphon from his seat of power. Clarith, impassioned by a new oath of vengeance which she had sworn, grew angry. She advocated for a more aggressive and violent strategy, involving a campaign of espionage and terror against the undead threat. Uncompromising, Clarith and a few like-minded followers set off into the sunset. They would go on to become the Crimson Reclaimers, while Calibrin, and those who allied with her, would found the Shining Sentinels. I'll get back to those factions in a moment. Since the now legendary Reforging, the renamed Knights of Lastwall have been busy. The timely arrival of allies from the Magambia was the first step in the now enormous process of coalition building in opposition to Tar-Baphon's return. At the same time, the Knights have undertaken missions in and around the Gravelands to aid in the escape of refugees and to undermine undead activity in the region. Numerous specialized factions have formed within the Knights, though these internal divisions have proven insubstantial in the face of the existential threat posed by Tar-Baphon. Even Clarith and her mother Calibrin have largely made amends, though they still disagree on the correct methods to advance their cause. Among the knights, there are two distinct ranks of import: squires and knights. Squires tend to be more recent joiners, though it is possible for someone to retain the rank of squire for their entire career. Squires are generally less experienced, and function best under the guidance of more seasoned knights. Their loyalty isn't in question, but they are not typically trusted with tasks of great import, in large part for their own safety. Full knights, however, have proven their skills and loyalty numerous times. To become a knight, a squire must be sponsored by at least one full knight, though 3 is preferred. The sponsor then knights the squire in a simple ceremony. Notably, no oath is required to become a full knight. Within the organization, all knights are considered equal, and no strict hierarchy exists between them. Among the Knights of Lastwall, there are internal designations for specific functions, though these do not designate rank or hierarchy. Adamants, sometimes abbreviated as Mants, are defensive bulwarks, soldiers at the individual or squad level who train in defense. This term often refers to heavily armored knights, but might include monks or similarly lightly armored defenders as well. Vindicators, meanwhile, are the offense to an adamant's defense. They focus on taking the fight to the enemy, either with armor and sword or stealth and guile. This term primarily deals with melee tactics. Angel feathers are the ranged combatants among the knights. They typically focus on bows and crossbows, but slings and firearms are not unheard of among their ranks. The term Sunbeam refers to anyone who gathers intel for the knights, either through conventional scouting or the use of divination magic. Tourniquets, meanwhile, is a term which includes all specialized healers, from conventional non-magical field medics to clerics and alchemists. And, of course, the order would be nowhere without the legions of support staff they employ. The term pillar is used to refer to cooks, smiths, stablemasters, and everyone else who contributes to the war effort in less martial or tactical ways. Pillars are particularly respected and cherished. A number of other slang terms and shorthand phrases have developed among the knights, and I suggest reading the Introduction and Among the Knights sections of the Knights of Lastwall book for more information if you're interested. Due to the fear which Tar-Baphon inspires the world over, a wide array of factions have thrown in their lot with the Knights of Lastwall. The Magambia, for instance, sees the threat of Tar-Baphon as one worth opposing, even from as far away as the Mwangi Expanse. They've sent researchers, spellcasters, and historians to aid in whatever way they can. The nations of Absalom, Taldor, Andoran, and Ustalav are all explicitly aligned with the Knights, while Druma, the Five Kings Mountains, and Kionin actively oppose the Tyrant and support in less overt ways. The Orcs of Belkzen, who despise the Tyrant for how he enslaved their ancestors, are largely aligned against him, but years of hostility with the Knights of Ozem has made an alliance tenuous at best. And on top of all of that, the Psychopomps of the Boneyard, the very servants of Pharasma herself, actively oppose the forces of the Undeath and lend their aid as scouts, soldiers, and guards when they can. The two most prominent factions among the Knights are the defensive Shining Sentinels and the offensive Crimson Reclaimers. Technically, no leaders exist among the Knights, but all factions have their most prominent and influential members. The Shining Sentinels, for instance, are broadly deferential to the former Watcher Lord of Vigil, Ulthun II, who leads the political and recruitment effort from Absalom. In the Gravelands, meanwhile, advisor Calibrin Eomidar has played a pivotal role in organizing, outfitting, and encouraging the Knights of Lastwall to reform their defenses and stand up to the Tyrant's offensives. The Shining Sentinels can be most easily thought of as the conventional knights in shining armor. They are honorable, straightforward, and honest. They seek to oppose the Tyrant in the way he was defeated before, raising an army of crusaders to drive his forces from the field, then confront him at his fortress and defeat him once and for all. To achieve this goal, the Shining Sentinels and their Knights Vigilant have prioritized several areas of focus. The first is containment. They seek to limit the undead expansion outside the Gravelands, and to reinforce defensive fortifications which are currently under knightly control. The second is recruitment. The Sentinels are well-spoken, and believe that gathering allies and outside help will be necessary to win. Finally, research. By working with the Magambia, the Sentinels hope to learn the secrets of Tar-Baphon's power and unravel it. By contrast to the Shining Sentinels, the Crimson Reclaimers take a more immediate approach. Embracing underhanded tactics and methods of terror, the Crimson Reclaimers and their Knights Reclamant pursue a merciless offense against Tar-Baphon and his lieutenants. They use stealth, trickery, and overwhelming force to make incursions into the Darklands, inducing fear in their foes and refusing to give the Gravelands up as lost. Led by Clarith Eomedar, the Knights Reclamant have sworn the mysterious Crimson Oath, a promise of retributive violence to be inflicted upon the undead hordes, which is empowered by some unknown entity with strange magic. The Crimson Reclaimers can be more easily thought of as insurgents, and spend a lot of time behind enemy lines. They typically conduct 3 types of missions. First, assassination. The Whispering Way and the Tyrant's armies are hierarchical, and taking out key players can leave the organizations weak and stumbling. Second, scouting. The Knights Reclamant believe in the power of information, and they readily gather and share it. Finally, sabotage and terror. The Reclaimers are not above fighting dirty, and wrecking supply lines, destroying infrastructure, and terrifying their enemies with grotesque displays are all considered fair tactics. There are, after all, no innocents among the undead. Despite the significant differences between their philosophies, the Shining Sentinels and Crimson Reclaimers still respect one another and work together, even if they might not like each other very much. The threat of the Whispering Tyrant has proven a unifying force. Still, especially among the Shining Sentinels, concerns have arisen about the nature of the mysterious Crimson Oath and the origins of the power it contains. Beyond these 2 major factions, many other minor factions exist. I've chosen to discuss 8 here, but the Knights of Lastwall book does detail several more. Charcoal Battalion is a force made up of hobgoblins, goblins, stone giants, and Oreads from the nation of Oprok. General Azerzi, leader of Oprok, insists that her nation is worthy of trust, and the actions of this force have gone a long way toward earning that trust among the knights. The battalion tends to rely on siege engines in battle, and employs fire as a weapon, relying on their fire-resistant stone armor to protect them. The Dozen Roses are well liked among the knights, and consist of a dozen former Grey Maidens from the city of Korvosa. The Roses specialize in flamboyant heroics and daring acts, and are masters of spinning epic and romantic tales of swashbuckling adventure. While they are effective on the battlefield, they have proven particularly skilled at diplomacy, negotiations, and recruitment. Supposedly, the Dozen Roses were recruited when Biravel Starshine joined Grey Maiden leader Filarina Gruntsleam for a candle-lit dinner. If these warriors sound interesting, check out my faction video on the Grey Maidens. Eutropia's Vanguard are a contingent of Ulfen Guard, sent by the Grand Princess Eutropia of Taldor. These warriors are traditionally the princess's own personal bodyguards, inspired by the real-world Praetorian Guard from Roman history. The Ulfen Guard have proven especially brave since joining the Knights, but are even more famous for their post-victory celebrations, which have earned both fame and infamy. Check out the Ulfen Guard archetype presented in Shining Kingdoms for more details. The final epitaph are a group of fanatically devout Pharasmans who see it as their duty to extinguish the undead from the face of Golarion. Their devotion is unquestioned, though many knights have deemed them suicidally brave. They rarely get deployed to the front lines unsupported as a result. They have developed a habit of consecrating the remains of their undead foes after battle, to prevent them from being raised by necromancy again in the future. The Order of the Shining Swords consists of Mendevian crusaders sent from the World Wound. With many veteran crusaders, this group is considered one of the most valuable assets to which the knights have access. They are loyal to Iomade and her new herald, Galfrey, the former queen of Mendev, and their crossed swords iconography represents these two champions. The Shining Swords have proven cooperative with the Crimson Reclaimers. From Belkzen, the Rampart Warband started off as a band of orcs dedicated to protecting the Knights of Ozem, and later Lastwall, from orcish attacks. With the return of the Tyrant, however, they've made their alliance more explicit. They now specialize in the hunting and killing of undead animals and beasts, skills which they developed fighting the powerful fauna of Belkzen. They often teach tactics to the knights, and their expertise is highly valued. The Vulture Knights, the faction with the coolest name, are a division of Eagle Knights from Andoran on field assignment to aid the Knights of Lastwall. Much like conventional Eagle Knights, they take great pride in their uniforms and appearance, but have modified their clothing to favor dark colors so it can be more easily camouflaged. They often use the giant vultures and giant vulture mounts they've trained to track and hunt corporeal undead. Finally, the Velumis Scholars faction is the official name given to the Magambian scholars who've joined the war effort against Tar-Baphon, as well as the local scholars who've joined them. These researchers and spellcasters have two primary goals. First, discover a means of restoring the lands of Lastwall, now the Gravelands, to their previous environmental status, uninfected with undead decay. Second, to gain a better understanding of Tar-Baphon's radiant fire. Though the weapon was destroyed during his initial escape, the scholars want to ensure he can never bring it to bear again. Like I said before, there are other factions among the knights which are fun and interesting, but details on them are pretty sparse. Check out the Knights of Lastwall book to learn more. Given the prominence of the Knights of Lastwall and their allies in this adventure, I do want to highlight a few key archetypes which feature prominently among these organizations. All 5 of these archetypes have new feats presented in this book, so PCs with these archetypes will have new options to consider. 3 particular archetypes, the Lastwall Sentry, the Knight Vigilant, and the Knight Reclamant, are specific to the Knights of Lastwall. The Lastwall Sentry emphasizes the importance of a shield, and increases the character's abilities to detect undead foes. The Knight Vigilant archetype, associated with the Shining Sentinel faction, is even tankier, and places emphasis on leading on the battlefield and enduring hits from undead foes. The Knight Reclamant archetype, which by contrast is associated with the Crimson Reclaimers, places greater emphasis on stealth, scouting, and offense, hiding from the senses of undead and dealing intense damage to undead foes. The Halcyon Speaker and Magambian Attendant archetypes, meanwhile, are associated with the Magambia, whose agents have allied themselves with the Knights of Lastwall. The Magambian Attendant archetype grants primal or arcane cantrips and access to a mask familiar, similar to the 10 magical warriors of Moangish legend, which serves as something of an evolution of the Attendant, focuses on the combining of arcane and primal magic, adding add-on effects to casting spells, and adding new spells to the character's spell list. All these archetypes could add a ton of flavor to characters in this adventure. Now it's time to dig into some specific player-facing information you can use to build your characters for Of Blood and Faith. Right off the bat, GMs should probably consider opening up the uncommon and rare character options from Lost Omen's Knights of Lastwall and the Book of the Dead. These might include rare backgrounds, like the Scion of Slayers or Tyrant Witness backgrounds, or various archetypes which I mentioned which have organizational access requirements. Plenty of these options are thematically appropriate, so if your players want to make use of them, I suggest you allow them, unless you have a very good reason not to. Similarly, it might be fun to allow the free archetype rules variant for this adventure, or at least the limited free archetype variant. Many archetypes are great for adding thematic depth and mechanical power to characters in this adventure, and players will very rarely get to experience the power fantasy madness that is high-level Pathfinder. Why not lead into that, by opening up free archetype? As for what archetypes to allow, I suggest all the archetypes I mentioned by name in this video, plus the medic and the multi-class archetypes for the cleric, champion, wizard, and guardian classes. Others might be applicable as well, depending on your players' interests. For players, building your PC for this campaign might be a fun exercise, but it will probably be a bit of a challenge. Your PC will start at 18th level, meaning you will need to make a lot of decisions regarding feats, skill increases, and, if you're a glutton for punishment, spells. The numerous class and spell guides available online will be your friends. On top of all of that, you'll need to pick out high-level gear. Just like with Ashes for Ozem, you can start with a lump sum, in this case 45,000 GP, and pay for every piece of gear you want. Or, and I think this is the better option, you could take the shortcut. With the shortcut, you get 1 permanent 17th level item, 2 permanent 16th level items, 1 permanent 15th level item, and 2 permanent 14th level items, in addition to a lump sum of 7,500 GP. That sum can then be spent on permanent items of level 13 or lower, or on consumables up to level 17. Book of the Dead and Lost Omens Knights of Lastwall present great options for characters to consider, in addition to the many fun options from Treasure Vault. Alright, now we can get to the fun bits, starting with the ancestries, which players might consider for their characters. The Knights of Lastwall draw a huge amount of support from all across the Inner Sea region. Orcs and Dromar from Belkzen, elves and Ayuvarin from Kyonin, dwarves from the Five Kings Mountains and nearby Kragadan, and humans from, well, basically everywhere, can all be commonly found among the knights. At the same time, gnomes, goblins, and halflings in the Eye of Dread region might all join up to oppose the Whispering Tyrant. Beyond these options, basically everyone who isn't undead opposes the Tar-Baphon and his forces to some degree. So if you want to play a lizard folk, a rat folk, a kobold, or a kitsune, among many other Avistani options, this is a great opportunity to do so. At the same time, the presence of the Magambia among the knights might open up other options to consider. This might include Mwangish ethnicities of humans, elves, halflings, and dwarves, but might also include Mwangish ancestries which are less visible in Avistan, like the Shisk, the Goloma, the Anadi, or the Konrasu. All of these could easily be present among the Mwangish delegation which has been sent to support the Knights of Lastwall. On top of these ancestries, a number of versatile heritages might be particularly thematic. The Duskwalker is a heritage associated with psychopomps of the Boneyard. Duskwalkers have a strong connection to the cycle of life and death, and are generally compelled by this understanding to oppose undeath at every turn. The Dhampir, meanwhile, might be a good choice for characters seeking to embrace their inner Alucard. Good-aligned Dhampirs might seek to undo the evil of their vampiric progenitors by allying themselves with the Knights of Lastwall. Similarly, changelings descended from the hags aligned with the Whispering Way might actively resist the call of their mothers by swearing the crimson or shining oaths. Finally, it might be interesting to play a character who is an unwilling undead. The idea of an unwilling undead is certainly compelling, and has a basis in the recent lore surrounding the Knights of Lastwall. Erasni herself was unwillingly raised to undeath by the Ghost King Geb. Among the mortal knights, Ileana Testhaik was turned into a vampire, but retained her sense of morality and her dedication to the forces of good. Existing as an undead among the knights might be a challenge, and may require multiple displays of loyalty and dedication to earn the knight's trust. Undead who do not want to present their form of existence to the world may choose to hide themselves in layers of armor or cloth. Moving on to the classes players might consider for their characters, the combat-focused martials have plenty of great options to choose from. The champion is, obviously, a fantastic thematic and mechanical choice for a combat-focused campaign featuring undead enemies. The justice and liberation causes will be the most effective here, emphasizing offense and defense respectively. Spirit Instinct Barbarians will excel at dealing damage to incorporeal undead, which are present throughout the adventure, and Vindicator Rangers will excel at switch hitting between magical and physical attacks in a more supportive role. Fighters, of course, are solid in combat, and are present in great numbers among the Knights of Lastwall. Finally, the Battle Harbinger Cleric archetype is a fantastic build as the anchor for a combat-oriented party, and can work to devastating effect if properly supported. Archetypes which support a frontliner or DPS playstyle in this adventure include the Undead Slayer, the Knight Reclamant, the Knight Vigilant, or the Lastwall Sentry, in addition to the usual recommendations of the Sentinel and the Bastion. Among the skill-focused martials, the Rogue is probably the standout choice, especially with the newly released Avenger class archetype, which combines religious belief with powerful dual-wielding abilities. The Thief Rogue is also effective here, with emphasis on damage in combat and disabling traps. The Thaumaturge is a great option as well, especially with the thematic connections to Lastwall as a region offering up thousands of years of history filled with ancient relics to serve as implements. The defensive amulet, offensive weapon, or utilitarian tome implements could all be great options in this adventure. Lastly, the Investigator could work well here, and I particularly like the new Palatine Detective archetype, which places emphasis on flexibility with spells and defense with a unique reaction. Archetypes which support a more utility-focused playstyle include the Soul Warden and the extremely cool Exorcist. Looking last at the spellcasters, the Cleric is the standout choice due to the prevalence of undead enemies and the importance of the religion skill. Both the Cloistered and Warpriest variants could be effective in this campaign, and the Cast Down feat has a ton of potential. Witches are a personal favorite class for me, and the Faith's Flamekeeper and Paradox of Opposites could both fit the themes of this story. The new Animist class offers up the Witness to Ancient Battles apparition, which is well suited to connecting to the violent history of the Lastwall region. Oracles with the Ancestors, Bones, or Life mysteries will all be useful and thematic, and the same could be said for sorcerers with the Psychopomp or Undead bloodlines. Of the archetypes which might support a spellcasting playstyle, the Hallowed Necromancer, Halcyon Speaker, and Magambian Attendant all fit this narrative quite well. A number of deities are great thematic choices for Of Blood and Faith. Erasni, Iomedae, and Pharasma are the strongest choices, but for different reasons. Erasni, the Unyielding, has the strongest connection to the story, and followers of Erasni who are well versed in her lore will be rewarded narratively. Iomedae, the Inheritor, meanwhile, also has connections to the overall plot, and her resolute opposition to Tar-Baphon will encourage followers to engage with the story. Pharasma, the Lady of Graves, represents the most extreme view of the three, and her followers will pursue and destroy the undead with fanatical devotion. All three are great choices, and followers of each could develop rich interpersonal conflicts among themselves to add to the narrative drama of the adventure. Outside of these three primary deities, other gods worshipped among the Knights of Lastwall could also be solid picks. Sarenrae, the Dawnflower, takes a more merciful approach to opposing evil, but her followers are no less skilled at dispatching the undead when the need arises. Archeros, the Bulwark, and Falena, the Warrior's Ring, both encourage martial skill among their followers, emphasizing defense of others and tactics with style, respectively. On the more extreme end, the followers of Regathiel, the General of Vengeance, and Vildeus, the Cardinal Martyr, are the most fanatically vicious when dealing with the forces of evil. Devout followers of these deities will excel in the combative elements of the campaign, but they might face a very particular narrative challenge at one key story moment. Beyond specific deities, the Grave Lady's Guard, or Sorrow's Sword pantheons could be fantastic choices for a more polytheistic character, especially with this adventure occurring around the God's Reign. The Grave Lady's Guard consists of Pharasma, Gorum, and Erasni, and focuses on leading the charge against the forces of undeath. Sorrow's Sword, meanwhile, consists of Erasni, Gorum, Iomedae, Regathiel, and Vildeus, and focuses on avenging those who've been wronged and protecting one's community. Both of these pantheons might be experiencing turmoil at the time of this adventure, given that Gorum has recently died in the God's Reign incident, which may or may not have just occurred, depending on when your GM decides to set this adventure chronologically. Looking at the backgrounds available to PCs for this adventure, many backgrounds might make sense for the knights and their allies. Among the common and uncommon background options, a few standouts include the Acolyte, Raised by Belief, the farmhand, the field medic, the guard, martial discipline, once bitten, OZEM experience, the refugee, relentless dedication, or the squire backgrounds. A number of rare backgrounds might be particularly fun as well. The Tyrant Witness is great, especially for knights or civilians who witnessed Tar-Baphon's return and are still dealing with that trauma. Scion of Slayers fits really nicely with a fanatical Pharasman, Regathian, or Vildaean for whom the destruction of the undead is an obsessive and uncompromising passion, which was ingrained in them from a young age. The Chosen One background could be a lot of fun for a religious character devoted to one of the thematic deities I mentioned before, and the same could be said of the Blessed background. Returned could be fun to play around with as well, for both living or undead characters. Finally, Tombborn could be especially interesting, and I like the idea of a character born to the Whispering Way cultists who defected to the Knights. GM Suggestions, or How Would I Run This? Warning, the following section is intended for GMs only. If you are planning to play in this adventure, I suggest stopping this video now. I'll need to discuss some spoilers to properly address my suggested adjustments to the adventure. You have been warned. Well, this one is a little weird. I really like Of Blood and Faith. This adventure is the undead-slaying crusade I have wanted to play for a long time, and it involves Arasni, the most compelling deity in the Pantheon. The story keeps the focus where it should be, on the combat, while still giving the PCs time to breathe with some simple social challenges and mystery solving. And the final mission is a no-nonsense fight with the big bad after a very brief dungeon crawl with some solid encounters and a very cool enemy in the form of the undead Norn. If I had one complaint, I would say that the adventure seems to rely on quite a bit of knowledge from the GM to fully understand the dramatic tension going on between Seldig Bedless, Arasni, and Iomedae. I'm a huge lore nerd, and even I still needed a refresher on the dramatis personae in this story. The adventure, as written, presents a few opportunities for exposition dumping on the PCs, so I strongly suggest that GMs take advantage of them. Personally, I love a pre-written cutscene as a means of conveying information to my players. I would probably implement several of these to convey the key events in the history of these three major players to the PCs. I would probably place these so that the heroes receive the visions each time they come into contact with one of the Bloodstones. This would space the visions out, giving each one time to simmer, but still connects them thematically. You could even lay the groundwork for this all the way back in Graveland's Survivors, by having the PCs in that adventure receive a vision when they first acquire their Bloodstone. As a narrative justification, you could simply state that the heightened emotions of Arasni, Seldig, and Iomedae are causing fragments of their power and memories to bleed into the material plane, and leak through artifacts connected to their shared history. I also like the idea of the Norn passing a final vision to the PCs upon her final death, revealing the details of Seldig's plans, assuming the PCs haven't pieced it together by then. Beyond that, though, I really like this adventure. I think it's well written and a lot of fun. I just tend to like crystal clear and heavy-handed narratives. I want my players to understand the drama in which they find themselves with no question about what's going on. And that finally wraps up the Claws of the Tyrant Adventure Anthology. I really like what Paizo did with this publication, and I look forward to their next foray into this method of storytelling. Though I do hope we get more of the Pray for Death style adventures as well. Maybe one of each every year. That would be nice. Like I said at the beginning of this series, I think Claws of the Tyrant succeeds in becoming more than the sum of its parts. Each of the three adventures does a pretty good job of telling a self-contained story within the bounds of a specific genre, and the collection together still manages to feel like a cohesive story told from a variety of perspectives. It does a good job shining a spotlight on the Gravelands, giving players a chance to experience the numerous stories in the region without giving them the chance to get bored. This was a ton of fun to read, and I think a lot of gaming tables will have fun with this one. Once again, I don't really know what's next in store for this channel. I'm still running things by the seat of my pants for a while, and I'm not back to my old production schedule. Actually, I don't know that I'll ever get back to that rate of video releases. It probably wasn't sustainable. I do have some ideas going forward. I really want to put out a video on Spore War, and I've already got some more deity videos outlined with research done. But whatever's next, I hope you stick around. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.